Welcome to the Composable Connection, where we dive into the world of composable commerce, exploring the technology, companies, and people working to create a more connected digital ecosystem. So, from whether it's an API integration or human touch points, we're going to discuss it all. And I'm really happy today to have guests from Algolia. I'm happy to introduce both Justin and Ben to the podcast.
Thanks for having us, James.
Thanks, James.
I appreciate it. I'll start off with a quick icebreaker. So, easy one. What do you think is the most important technological advancement of the last decade? I said I'd start easy.
Jeez. Of the last decade?
Last decade, yeah.
Wow.
So lots gone on.
In my head, the past decade's been since 2003, so I have to fix that.
Yep, 10 years ago in the
2012
90s. Yeah, we're aging ourselves here.
I feel like this is recency bias, but and we're just in the early days of it, but the generative AI is insane.
Yeah.
Last decade, I guess cryptocurrency falls outside of that, but it's also falling out of favor right now. I mean, APIs are big.
APIs are big. The
And they're
ability.
on brand.
I think AI is a good choice. And I remember going to a conference years ago about AI, and everyone was labeling their products AI, and it kind of lost touch for a little bit there. And now it's all coming back into the realm with these new tools. So
Yeah. I think probably what happened was, though, that we took a greater degree of automation and called it artificial intelligence, and it wasn't quite there yet. It was just more automated and scalable. And I think for the first time, we're actually seeing true artificial, what looks like intelligence and understanding for the first time.
We
Which
took
is wild.
machine learning and just labeled it AI.
Yeah, exactly. There's a great quote that I probably saw on some random Twitter profile that was like, it's machine learning for hiring and AI for fundraising, or vice versa.
It's very true.
Yeah.
How about yourself? You have a different answer? Or you're sticking with?
I mean, the API push, the ability for technologies to readily connect to basically anything in the entire world. If you're a rock and you have an API, then you can get connected with, which is absolutely huge in the past 10 years. Maybe outside of 10 years, probably outside of 10 years. I'm going to get corrected by somebody on this, but I think that's absolutely huge.
Yeah. I mean, API is a little older than 10 years, too.
Yeah, that's what
But
I was. Yeah,
I remember making my first headless, purely JavaScript system, which was like a shoe customizer for FootJoy. And it was all APIs at the time, and that was 2008. So we're all aging ourselves. And 10 years, I want to say mobile right away, but mobile's way more than 10 years, right?
Yeah.
Also 2008-9 timeframe.
Yeah, something like that. But I think APIs, the usability of APIs has absolutely accelerated in the last 5 to 10 years. I mean, I had an idea for a stupid messaging service to use myself, and I'm not a developer, and I was able to log on to Twilio and use their dashboard and build out some conditional logic and send myself a text message, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. All right. So we got AI, APIs, and mobile, but not 10 years. Absolutely. Which leads us to that API discussion. I'll sing Algolia's praises every day, but why don't you guys introduce the company a little bit and what Algolia does?
Yeah. So Algolia is a search and discovery API. We've been around for a little over 10 years. And we have about 17,000 customers spanning from e-commerce to media to SaaS, internal use cases, et cetera. And really all that we are is we're a relevance engine that sits between your users and your content. So whether that's e-commerce content, if you're a publisher and you're trying to surface articles, the goal of the company is really to marry intent with results.
Nice. I'm glad to have Algolia as our first podcast guest, because I believe you were our first integration in our integration hub too, which is getting data out of Elastic Path and directly into Algolia. And it was such an easy setup and such an easy system to run with. I believe the team that built it in a few days, and the APIs were just so powerful and easy to use to get that data in there.
Yeah. I think we were talking about it before the show, just the developer ecosystem and how we've really tried to focus on, we're rooted in a developer-first API, and building a whole ecosystem around that has always been kind of the number one principle, because everything extends beyond that.
Yeah, and it's definitely a developer first to help get everyone off the ground, to get things built quickly and smoothly. But I think it's no longer just about the developer in this composable world. It's really about the business too, and bring them along for the ride. I think Algolia does a good job of that too.
Yeah. I think it's something that in the early days of the platform, there was an impossible trade-off that you had to make before Algolia existed. You can have a team of developers use open source search technology like anything Lucene-based, Elasticsearch, Solr, and really developers just owned it. And then there was a ticketing system or meetings that were set up to manage relevance and improve results with the business side. Or you bought something that was totally plug and play, fully owned by business users, but those systems just decided what was relevant based on their own algorithms, and it had nothing to do with the specificities or idiosyncrasies of your business. And so developers were isolated, there was no ability to control, and so really the unique value proposition of Algolia is the best of both worlds. It's an API-first technology with an entire business layer that sits on top, so people could work in parallel with one another and not slow each other down.
Yeah. Build then buy, that's what we call it. But yeah, development is required to implement Algolia. Like, you're going to need to do some development, but we've got all the tools there ready for your business team to start using. We're actually kicking out a new one, Merchandising Hub, that we're actually showing here at the Expo to make it even easier for merchandisers, which we're seeing more often in kind of that business making decision of what search platform to go with. So we're really excited about that.
Very cool. And I think it's interesting, being at Shop Talk today, they're talking so much about headless and composable commerce, and these are super trendy buzzwords that are taking over the space. But both Elasticpath and Algolia existed well before the term composable even was part of the marketplace. So you've been adding your product on top of e-commerce and really any website or digital experience much longer. Has this buzz around composable changed anything for you?
I think it's validated a lot of the early hypotheses of the business, and I think we had some really, really, really talented technical founders, 2 technical founders, and the product was actually originally, it's funny coming back to mobile, it was originally designed for mobile, so it needed to be very flexible, very fast. And I think the composable and headless movement has assigned a lot of words to, I think, the feeling of developers for many years, which is just this idea of interoperability and the ability to iterate quickly and hyper-specialization, which, if you want to make the whole greater than the sum of its parts, that's the hyper-specialization.
Yeah, and from the partner's standpoint, what I've seen, of course, you've got your giant Accentures, your Capgeminis, et cetera, and we partner with them and a whole bunch of niche partners as well. But from professional services, you've got the big boys that can do composable, they can do Salesforce, they can do Shopify, they can do basically any platform out there, right? But the more niche boutique 100 to 500 person agencies are really focused on composable, or they're focused on Salesforce, or they're focused on certain platforms, with composable gaining the most steam over the past couple of years. And I'm seeing professional services agencies that are becoming opinionated on composable, so that they don't just do composable. We specifically do this stack of composable. I have an opinion about this stack in particular for their clients, which is really good to see the kind of specialization and the reason for their opinions.
Yeah, it definitely makes them experts in the field. And I think we're still in the early days to a certain degree, because you've got this vision of Lego bricks and plug and play, but for most people that's not there yet. We just launched the integration hub that you can get integration in under 5 minutes, but you're still doing some development work at the end of the day. So do you think some smaller companies are getting scorned at all by these development firms trying to build too much or more than they need?
We like to talk about composable being super easy, like you said, the Lego brick analogy. And at the end of the day, it's a big lift. The beautiful part about that lift is that you can do it one piece at a time. You're not doing a full re-platform onto a monolithic that has your OMS, CRP, everything connected to it, right? You can do a bit at a time. What we're seeing is a lot of people start with the bit that's going to be a revenue driver for them, especially in this economic environment right now. So we're starting to see people, as opposed to starting with the big OMS, the warehouse management tool, whatever it is, they have a smaller budget and they need a lift from it. So we are seeing people that start with the head of that transformation, specifically starting with search, starting with the CMS, moving over to commerce platform, et cetera.
No, that's great. I think that's why everyone talks about, hey, it's time to value much sooner.
Yep.
The project's still going to take time, but you're going to get ROI really early in the project stages.
Yep. Yeah. And that funds the rest of the project at the end of the day, right? Which is wonderful for you if you're making the budget or if you're the one putting your neck on the line.
Yeah. And just to add to that, one of our implementation philosophies is really centered around the lean startup methodology, if you're familiar with that, the classic book. And a lot of customers ask about, well, how long will it take to get live, right? Everyone wants to know that answer. And the right answer is, well, as fast as possible to have a real MVP where you can start collecting data, see real value, and start iterating very quickly. And I think that's the value for both the smaller companies going headless and the larger ones, which is you could now start iterating in a much faster cycle, close the feedback loop sooner, and you could learn more about your business and your customers and pivot.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of our core tenets as well, is we're constantly tracking how long each project takes, and that's one of our metrics to get it down as short as possible. We want people up and running with the pieces that are most important to them, which is often products and product discovery, as soon as possible, because anything you do to start lifting that conversion rate is going to start driving revenue.
Nice.
Absolutely.
Smart thing to track as well. I mean, it helps your team not just give some random answer out to the end client and then you have somebody upset because it took 3 times as long. So smart to track that. I like it.
Yeah, and I think a lot of companies in this space take a different role with their customers. They're not selling, box software that you're going to install somewhere. They're selling a relationship that's going to last 3-5 years, and you're going to be with that customer day in, day out, the problems, the good times, and you're going to win with them and lose with them. So it's a very different relationship that we have with our customers being SaaS platforms.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I think like a lot of the monolithic platforms, their business model was based around being a walled garden and keeping people in the platform for as long as possible and making it absolutely painful to get out.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like a little bit of an abusive relationship. It's not super healthy because if you're a little insecure, you don't want people to leave. But, in our ecosystem, I think that's 100% right. I mean, everything's around proving value and working with the customers to own whatever KPIs they're trying to drive in the business. And if we can't do it, we'll say, all right, you could easily move to somebody else. So you have to earn it.
Absolutely. I mean, an e-commerce platform, you typically only have one, but people are adopting Algolia even though they have a search built in, even though they already have something to, discover products or other content, and they're layering Algolia on.
Almost never, sorry to interrupt you, but it's almost never that somebody's thinking about search for the first time when they come to us.
Yep.
So are there any things you want to call out that you think are driving people to almost pay for search twice?
Well, I think they have it included, but they recognize a few things about search that are interesting. And I actually have a traditional finance background, and what finance is, it's all about allocation of resources, and an e-commerce website is all about optimizing different areas of your funnel. And if you look at any e-commerce site, search typically converts at about 2 to 5 times the rate of customers that do not interact with the search bar. Mm-hmm. It is a mechanism to capture high intent user behavior, and it's typically going to be the fastest way to match that high intent with a result. And so even in relatively poor search experiences, customers are seeing that type of benefit. The problem that they're having is that their overall relevance still isn't fantastic. They know it's some of the lowest hanging fruit on the website by far. I mean, even if they can get just more people using the search bar by making it faster and more intuitive, forget about the quality of the results for a second, just the user experience around it. If you get 5% more users to search on something that converts 3x more, you're going to result in more top line revenue for the business, period.
Is that easy?
Yeah.
I have nothing to add to that. It was great. Wonderful answer.
Well, the only thing I'll add,
We do see where certain clients will bring us in for specific projects. ASICS, for example, we do their shoe finder specifically, and we prove ourselves there, and then we grow within the account, right?
Mm-hmm. I think it's also a great example in that when we talk about search and discovery, I mean, shoe finder is a guided quiz where you're going through a series of questions and answers to find results. It's not exactly the search bar as you would think. Also, a lot of people don't realize that category and collections pages, which it could be a whole different rabbit hole of a conversation, so we can go there if you want, but merchandisers typically take a very intuitive approach to collections pages. They could perhaps take a more data-driven and scalable approach by using some sort of relevance tool like Algolia.
Yeah, and I think we've seen that products keep getting more and more complex as companies try and stand out from the crowd. It's no longer just selling T-shirts with a size and a color. You're looking at advanced bundles. You're looking at configurations. You're looking at all sorts of weird product taxonomies. And we strive really hard to support that with PXM, and it's great to see all of that funnel into Algolia so easily, like the robustness of data.
And then the personalization on top of it, right? Like the company has to separate itself more than just the medium red shirt. They need to know your past history. We plug in CDPs really often, do a fantastic job at using our AI to the artificial intelligence point and machine learning to really personalize the experience for the shoppers, right? Which only drives more of that revenue, right?
Yeah, and I think about it. I'm always thinking about search as products, but we were talking about before we came into the room all the different places you've added your search, like the Hacker News feed, or even our own documentation is running on the search.
Yeah.
So what are there any weird use cases you can think of that you've thrown content in there for searchability?
Yeah, well, I mean, and what's interesting, it's not just the different use cases across different parts of the site or different sites. It's actually a lot of customers will use a central search bar to return results across different types of content at the same time. We call that a federated search experience. So you're returning products, content, FAQs. We have customers that'll use certain rules. So someone says, for example, say you use the search bar and type in returns. Well, you don't want a product. You want to get to the returns page. And that is a high intent request. Can you match it with a redirect to your returns page link, as an example? To answer your question more directly, I think an example I think about a lot as a less common use case, but one that's very valuable, is the Times in the UK uses Algolia to do editorial work internally. So they actually use Algolia to surface the most relevant content to help shape what the paper or the digital paper is going to look like that day.
Gotcha. So you're driving what people learn that day.
Yeah.
I believe NPR does that as well, and now pushed this to the front of the site. But internally, it was initially brought in Algolia so that their editors and writers can look up old docs or old things that were posted, and then they brought us to the front of the site and have that federated search experience as well. One of my favorite examples is probably Harry Rosen, that has been an Algolia client for 4 or 5 years now. They use us internally. They use their voice search. So they use us on the site. They use us a ton of places. But one of the things they do with us that's really cool is voice search. And it's for their internal representatives. So the average customer at Harry Rosen, high-end retailer, spends $2,000+ a year, I believe. So very important to treat those customers with an extreme amount of personalization, an extreme amount of care. But a customer can go into the store, talk to the representative, say, hey, I like that shirt right there. Representative can actually search for that shirt, whatever the brand or whatever the make is, and then the color and the size. And it'll pop up results for that rep to go grab the shirt out the back. But if they don't have that shirt in stock, it'll pop up recommended based off of that user's history or similar items to that shirt, which is really, really cool, all via voice.
Yeah, I get yelled at all the time because I always use the word e-commerce, again, showing my age, and they go, it's not just e-commerce anymore. It's digital commerce, it's omni-channel, and all the services and the things we're talking about are not just for the website. It's for mobile, it's for in-store.
Yeah, so, I mean, one of our most recent examples with a little company called Walgreens, if you've ever heard of them.
I think I have,
Yeah, there are a lot of corner stores. So they actually implemented Algolia in only 16 weeks, and the primary objective was around BOPUS. So think about like a mom picking up her kids from school after soccer practice, needs to get to the store, pick something up on her way home, whether it be medical, food, otherwise. Walgreens' struggle, obviously, it's not surfacing results in the store, but it's ensuring that the results on their website, especially on mobile, are reflective of real-time inventory based on geolocation. And it's really hard. A lot of what we're talking about are front-end user experiences, but it's really challenging as a developer to build in-house really powerful indexing and updating engines such that a user can pick up something within 15 minutes and you're rest assured that that product's going to be in stock.
Yeah, with Walgreens, it's pretty high stakes.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, they are, if you think about everything that we do, it's about removing friction for users, right? And if you think about a convenience store of some kind or a pharmacy, it's all about convenience, reducing friction for the customer as possible. And it's a great example of how it translates from their site to in person.
Yeah. And I think that's some of the pushback I heard in this morning's session on, they were talking about headless actually. And the first thing they said was headless is decoupling your website from your back end. And that's all it is. And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, no, APIs take it so much further because you have experiences like this that you couldn't power without an API. If you were just offering an HTML website, there'd be no way to get that tie-in to that BOPUS experience with that full search experience, with that full system-wide integration.
Yeah. There's a book that's passed around a lot at Algolia. It's called Ask Your Developer. I don't know if you're familiar with it. Jeff Lawson, the CEO of Twilio, wrote it. And there are 2 awesome chapters in the book, and one of them is called The Software Supply Chain. And what I love about that chapter is Jeff talks about the equivalence of like auto parts manufacturing and how like in a Toyota Camry, there are, Toyota's a huge company with unbelievable amounts of resources. You would think they'd be able to vertically integrate absolutely everything and build their own car, but that's not what they do. They find small, like very specific experts for individualized components of their car, and their core competency is not necessarily the creation of those products, but how they all come together. And I think that's what the composable movement is really doing for the modern digital business, is it's allowing for this new type of specialization and focus on what you do really well. And we're there just to support those companies in doing that.
Absolutely.
As a side note, just to headless, so I worked at a commerce platform before this, and they had I won't name the client, but a very big manufacturer. And in, I want to say 2013, 14, 15, in that time frame, that client actually ripped off the head that came with the commerce platform and put their own CMS on. And that's the first time I had ever seen or heard of headless in my life. In fact, everybody at the company, which company is now in the MACH Alliance and very API driven, but everybody at the company was kind of like, what did they do? That was my first run into with headless, and that sounds like what they're talking about whenever they say decouple the front end and the back end. That was the talk of, 5 years ago, 6 years ago. Now it's different talk track, right?
I do find it interesting from the developer perspective because for us, it's not new. APIs have been around for more than 10 years, a long time. The idea of having an n-tiered architecture has been around for a long time. Trying to leverage services instead of reinventing the wheel. You're always trying to buy. It's just interesting that now the entire industry is talking about all of these tech terms. It's exposed it to everyone else in the business, and in one hand, I think it's great that everyone's getting educated on what your developer should be doing as they build things out. On the other hand, it's sharing all of our secrets. I don't know how I feel about that.
Well, there are some great parody videos of like what people think I do all day as a developer, and it's with a bunch of command lines and huge windows of code, and then it's in reality, and it's just like a Stack Overflow window. But
it's a little too close to home.
No, but I think there, to that point though, it's funny. It's not necessarily about revealing secrets, but I think it's about the two sides of the business finding common ground, common language, and being able to work together rather than this like codependency that slowed businesses from innovating for many years. It's tough.
Yeah, you definitely have both sides of the house working together. And also what's interesting on the Composable side is you broke up these giant software platforms and you said, let's break them into pieces. And so I feel like you have different companies working together that wouldn't normally have in the past. You have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, what I've seen in the markets, and I've been in partnerships for 5+ years now, is just every technology has usually had professional services organizations that they've relied on, right, to ensure smooth implementation, to ensure that they're speaking the same language, to align on procurement, et cetera, right? There has been a giant movement of technology partners or ISVs working together, because at the end of the day, we're working a project or we have a large client that is doing a full digital transformation. They're doing the front-end framework, the CMS, the commerce platform, the search. We need to be aligned with each other, know the order of things that are happening. If there is a problem, how do we work together to solve that for the end client? Because if we make it a bad experience on one frame, it looks bad for all of us in the composable space, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think if you just think about our relationship, not personal relationship, but if you think about our relationship as companies, right? I mean, for you guys, you're a GMV-driven business. And so if Algolia is an opportunity to increase GMV on a site through optimizing conversion rates, why would you not bring us forward? And we've done that on probably half a dozen occasions just lately, working together with customers on better end-user experience, better experience for the business, more revenue for the business, and then bigger pieces of the pie for us.
Absolutely. If we can bring someone in to get them to grow their business, why not make that connection? But then also our shared customers being able to give that level of support, because sometimes they might not know what's going wrong or what's happening or how they can improve. So having those back channels to constantly be discussing and understand what's going on and making sure that, someone's on call at all times and ready to answer the phone is super beneficial.
There is within the composable space, there is no one throat to choke, right? Monolithic, you know where to go. I need to go to this person, my CSM here, and they can take care of the problem. There's no one throat to choke within the composable space, if you will, from a client endpoint. So we have to work together to make sure that we know which throat needs to be choked.
Which is funny, because I feel like it often works better for end clients with multiple vendors, because with the one throat to choke, it wasn't one vendor. It was a large company that built a bunch of software through acquisition that may or may not be integrated well, that may or may not play nicely with each other. And it wasn't really one throat. You had one call to make, but on the other side, they were hustling to figure out who they need to connect with. Whereas here, it's very transparent on who's on the other side of the phone and who's talking to who.
Yeah, and again, we're made accountable, right? Because the flexibility of composable technology, you can rip and replace much easier. So we have to earn it, and we have to be there for our customers. So it's a much healthier relationship.
I'm curious, because both of our companies, clearly API first, composable, but for the ones that do have their walled gardens that are trying to lock in for everything, do you think those walls are coming down?
I mean, you see the shift happening. I mean, Shopify recently came out with their composable offering. Salesforce recently came out with its own composable offering. You see that they see some cracks and opportunity to try to lock in a client that maybe they're on an old site genesis with Salesforce, right? And it's not a great experience. They're not enjoying it. Salesforce still has a great product, right? They've got a fantastic product, but they are opening up the ability to optimize where they don't have a really good product.
Yeah, I think a great analogy is electric vehicles. I mean, Tesla being composable in this case and headless, right? I mean, they hit a certain critical mass of demand, and the market momentum was so strong that the expectation of consumers now in the future is electric vehicles. So what happened a couple of years ago, Ford, GM, all the Italian and German car companies, right? Like all of a sudden everybody has their electric pickup truck now.
Yes.
And they recognize that, hey, listen, if we just continue to sell our own way, we're not going to meet the demands of consumers, and we're going to end up like Blockbuster. So you have the large monolithic software platforms of the world that are saying, all right, like we need to wake up and come up with solutions here, which is, again, just more choices for the customer, which should yield better results and outcomes.
Yeah, you're pushing the whole industry forward. And, we each have our individual companies, but we're also part of the broader industry, and we want the whole industry to see success.
Yeah.
I do like Tesla as an example. I always use it as an example for weird UIs because, the anytime I transact with Tesla, I show up to a stall, I plug in, and then I leave, and they send me an email later. Not even an email, an app notification telling me how much I owe. So they've gotten rid of the UI from their whole checkout experience.
What's actually interesting about that is up in that book, Ask Your Developer, Jeff Lawson talks about both the Tesla and the iPhone and minimizing the amount of physical buttons on any device. So you can push like OTA software updates and make quicker changes to technology. And not be reliant on now a hardware supply chain to keep up with your software supply chain.
And we're going way off on a tangent, but they did take it too far. My wife's Model Y, you have to use a touch screen to open the glove box. So we love the car, but you do need to find a balance. You you can't get so caught up in one specific thing that you don't realize there's a better way out.
Especially if the battery dies on a cold day and your warm hat and scarf is in the
Yeah.
glove is in the glove box and you can't get it out.
For those that still keep gloves in the glove box.
Yeah, exactly right.
Nice. So as you look forward, I mean, we talked about where we came from and what's going on at the conference today. Do you have any predictions? What's coming forward?
One thing I'll come back to is, I started off, you asked about what the most exciting technologies are, and I mentioned some of this generative AI, ChatGPT type stuff. I do not think, and I think a lot of people agree with me, that this is a fad of any kind. There is real utility in this technology, and it's really incredible. Algolia, we actually our whole business is kind of shifting in this direction around natural language understanding, and we're releasing a product called Neural Search, which is basically a large language model behind our core search technology to answer more natural language type long tail queries in a more, not necessarily like chat type way yet, but just being able to better understand the intent of user in the language they're most comfortable with, further reducing friction. The outcomes are absolutely amazing. We could talk more about that, but I think that type of technology is going to be embedded. I mean, next Shop Talk, there are going to be companies that you didn't even see here before that are built on top of some of this stuff. And
it does change the way users interact. 10, 15, 20 years ago, if you wanted to find something, you had to be very specific. You'd say, red jacket, don't be too wordy, don't go too crazy. And now the tools, you can be much more expressive and get a much better result.
Yeah. I mean, you think about the generation that's growing up right now, that they use speak-a-text speak-a-search all the time with Google or with Amazon, Alexa. They're used to more natural language searching. So, our generation is used to keyword, making sure that it's pretty exact. We are able to expand that across all generations, if you will, to be able to make sure that we get, if you're looking for something to keep my beer cold, you get a refrigerator, right?
Yeah.
Hopefully a 5-year-old's not looking for that, but, the younger generation as they grow up will definitely utilize this even more.
Yeah, well, I mean, a great example that was just shared with me also is, let's just say you're watching a YouTube video of some tech influencer that you follow, and they have this really cool, very clicky keyboard that's heavy duty and clicky. You don't know what it's called, but you want a heavy duty clicky keyboard. So if you go to Best Buy and you search heavy duty clicky keyboard, you might not be able to find that result or name your electronics provider.
Yeah.
But with the technology that we're releasing, if you wrote that, you would get mechanical keyboards because we'd understand what you mean by bulky and clicky.
Absolutely. We'll figure out exactly which switches they need, which is, takes it to that next level.
Exactly. And, not to get too into the weeds on this stuff, but one challenge there is that, we talked about how performance is something that's paramount, and that reducing that friction for the end user, minimizing latency at all costs.
Mm-hmm.
This type of technology, while it's revolutionary, is extremely onerous on CPUs, and it's really hard to return and retrieve results in these huge large language models. And so one thing that we actually purchased a company that did this, is they actually have compressed down a lot of these long vectors into binary code to allow for really fast performance. You don't have to compromise some of these things or pay out the wazoo to capture some of this technology.
That's very cool. And we all know that in e-commerce, or digital commerce, I should say,
Yeah.
Time is money. For each second it takes longer to load, people are going to get, Yep. They're going to bounce. They're going to leave.
Yeah, exactly.
On the partner side, do you see any new categories emerging, any new players that you want to call out for the next 10 years, or just any tech in general? I'll leave it open.
Just the immersive experience probably is going to continue. I think there's a company called 3Kit, right, that does AI, images where you can want to buy a sofa, you can take a picture of your room, see what that sofa is going to look like in your room. I'm looking at houses right now for purchasing a house, and you'll constantly see virtually staged houses using a technology like this. I think that starts to become more prevalent within clothing that you may purchase, within products. I think that it's going to be a bit of more immersive experience within the shopping experience. on this site to really personalize it to you and what this feels like to you.
Yeah, it always seems to come in multiple waves, because that whole 3-kit AR experience had a big push a few years ago, and it was kind of clunky. No one wanted to use it. No one wanted to touch it. They did crazy things like put makeup on you, and it just never lined up properly. But you're right. I'm seeing more staged houses with furniture in there, and sometimes you don't notice up front. You don't even realize that that's what it's done until you see the little note on the bottom saying, yes, this is digitally staged.
I think that becomes a much smoother experience. I think 3Kit was almost ahead of its time in that, and hasn't been fully adopted, but I think there will be adoption in that front.
When I was redesigning my home office to transition working from home, I worked with a company that was going to help me design it. And they sent me 3D renders with furniture and posters and everything that I would need, with shopping links right there to go buy it. And it looked like a photograph. I couldn't tell.
Yeah, but imagine the combination of these technologies, right? So you have a query and you want to solve some sort of problem in furnishing your living room, and maybe you have some words to describe what you're looking for. So you write in this maybe long form text on a site, like, hey, I'm looking for a modern living room with a really, a couch with a big chaise and blah, 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 blah. And then they'll understand your query and not only give you results, but maybe it'll say, all right, can I please have the dimensions of your room? Send me some pictures of your room. And maybe the results are exactly what you just described, is some sort of like virtual world of your room, and you could see it, and the products are all tagged, and you can go ahead and make those purchases. The other benefit is actually not a hardware, but a logistical benefit, in that we were just having a conversation earlier before we came up here with a reverse logistics provider, and the amount of returns in a more digitally commerce world is through the roof. And so these things also help reduce customer acquisition costs, capture more dollars, reduce returns. There's an environmental impact of that, so all super positive.
Yeah, I think it's great that a lot of these examples that come to our minds and everyone's minds are a little flashy, but they're often user-driven, right? It's a user interacting with something. And on the background, you've just got product APIs and card APIs and, all the other APIs powering what you need to do, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. And I think it gives these companies a heads up that they don't have to build everything from the ground up. They can build that immersive experience and leverage everything behind it. So it's making us move faster to that next wave. Yeah, I'll give you an opportunity if there's anything we didn't talk about that you want to as part of this discussion.
I think we covered a lot. I do think, just to zoom out for a second, the last 3 years have been such a whipsaw for digital commerce, right? Because you had, the complete shutdown in 2020, and then the immediate bounce back. 2021 was nobody can move fast enough, sell enough, get enough inventory, hire enough, whatever. And then 2022, the scale started tipping the other way. So I think everybody's woke up at the top of 2023 thinking about, well, what the heck are we going to do with our business this year? And I think the answer to that is, it's not the strongest species that survives, it's those that are most adaptable to change. And I think these microservice first, composable, API first technologies really enable businesses to weather storms and adapt to shifts in consumer demand and markets much faster. So if there's anything that we now know for sure, is to expect more unexpected, and I think composable commerce gets you there.
Absolutely.
Great point. I think that's the reason there's been such a takeoff over the past couple of years, right, is the ability to move fast and be flexible, all spurned from what happened in 2020 and the following years. So that's a great point.
Yeah. And the tech listeners know that all the tech we're talking about, microservices and APIs, have been around for a long time. What's really exciting now is that companies are in place that help put it together without everyone having to build their own. So you can get into composable commerce without having to build a microservice by working with vendors like Algolia and Elastic Path. And it helps every company, regardless of your size, get that agility. It's no longer just the largest enterprise companies that should be calling us up and saying, hey, we want to be able to virtually stage a room so that we can have buy buttons or whatever's going to come next. So absolutely.
And just to zoom in completely to the other side of this for a second, that flexibility extends to also how we work with customers or prospective customers on an evaluation. So historically, it was you spoke to your Gartner analyst and you got a bunch of slides at the executive pitch, and everyone came in and wined and dined you. And the approach that we've taken has been a extremely flexible evaluation path. Index your data into Algolia, we'll build you a POC, we can work through a few different UI designs with you. I mean, we do all of this with customers on their timeline. They are able to see what they need to see to get proof of the technology. We can do it with partners in certain instances and work with them. And so it really helps remove friction on the front end of these things to reduce risk in terms of actually making that big purchase and making the big shift as well.
Yeah, I think we touched on it earlier, the strangler pattern, common in tech. Now making it to the business world of you don't have to budget for an entire new system. You can hit the pieces that are most important.
Yeah, totally.
And you can use professional services. There's experts in the industry, right? So highly recommend, especially within the composable space, leaning on a professional service provider, whether it's just specifically and only for strategy and their recommendations to you on the steps to go about moving to composable, or expanding within your composable stack, or if they're going to do the implementation for you as well, if you don't have the developer services. But there's experts out there in this industry that can advise you on it.
Yeah, and I find that we have global services that can do an entire implementation. They're every position you would need, not just experts to consult. But what I also find is that they're getting involved much earlier in the conversation. It used to be that you bought software, the business bought software, went to your programmers to do implementation, and then maybe you'd ask them for help where needed. Now they're getting involved in that very first conversation to make sure that everything's planned from beginning to end and runs smoothly. Because again, it's that long-term relationship we're building.
And there's so many more options too, right? I mean, the business didn't have a choice between one of 3 providers. There's now dozens of providers, and all with different flavors of the way that they approach different sides of the business. And you need a subject matter expert to contextualize what's right for you and help shortlist who you should evaluate and ultimately go with.
Yeah, it's great. I appreciate you guys taking time out of this conference. I know there were plenty of other talks you could have been attending instead of talking to us, but we do appreciate the time, the insights, and this is a great discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, James.
Thanks, James.